Turn my mic on. Welcome back. Hope you've had a good break over Easter. I know I certainly did. Ate probably too much chocolate, but you know, what else are you going to do when you're stuck at home at Easter time and you can't get out to visit friends or family? Thanks for coming and joining me again today. We're going to be jumping back into this week's renditions of the Photo Hour, talking about self-portraiture. We're also going to talk about a couple of other things this week. We're going to talk about still life tomorrow, interiors the next day, and we're going to finish off talking about flash versus continuous light. And I thought that would be a good one for us to finish on because a lot of what I've been talking about recently has been to do with using either flash or continuous light sources, and there's pros and cons to each. So that'll sort of round things off and maybe talk about a few more technical things that we haven't necessarily covered when I've been going through some of the examples that I've been showing you throughout the classes. Just before we get started, we are open again. So we were closed over Easter, but the shop is open again now, open from 11 till 4 if you'd like to visit us. You can also chat to us online at any time, or you can give us a call. I've got the phone number, I forgot to pick it up here, 9672-2222. You'd think I'd have that memorized by now, but I've got a memory like a sieve. So today we're going to talk about self-portraiture, which is something that really sort of is an exciting topic, I suppose, to talk about, at least for me, because a lot of my personal work revolves around self-portraiture and has done for many years. And there are many reasons for that. But let's get started by talking about what a self-portrait is. And this seems obvious, right? So a self-portrait is just a photo taken of yourself rather than someone else. But I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. Because self-portraiture conveys something that we don't necessarily get in regular portraiture. And for those who are sort of up to date with photographic sort of theory and photographic debate, you know, there's this conversation that's really happening at the moment as to what the relationship is between the photographer and the subject, and you know, whether that relationship is one that's where the subject's being taken advantage of. So there's a real push for collaboration with photography and portraiture at the moment. But really the best way we can convey our subject in the most purest, honest sense is to photograph ourselves, because really we can only truly know ourselves and know exactly what our intention is when we're trying to represent our portrait by being the subject and the photographer simultaneously. So that's why I think self-portraiture has a sort of special place within the world of photography and within art as general. I mean, self-portraiture goes back for many, many centuries. It was done by painters for many years for a couple of different reasons. It's been done by photographers for many years as well. So it's really got a specific place in the canon of art. And even now with the selfie, you know, I would argue that the selfie is a form of self-portraiture and self-expression, and one that's really accessible to a large amount of people. And you know, like, lots of people have negative things to say about selfies, but I think if you look at someone's selfies, say on their Instagram feed as a whole, it really does show you the aspects of their life that they're wanting you to see, and it shows you the way that they want to show their life. How fictitious that is or true that is up for debate, but we use self-portraits all the time in order to convey our place within the world and show you know, our position as part of a culture and part of a society, and we do this through the visual language of photography. Now, historically, I would say there's two main reasons that self-portraiture has been used. The first one was to show technical prowess. So self-portraits are often used to convey a certain skill, whether it is in painting or photography or sculpture or whatever, but to say, hey, you know, I can take these really, really amazing shots and these number of different ways, and people have used them as a sort of folio builder, I suppose, for many, many years to show that they're very good at doing a particular area of something. The other thing I would say that self-portraits are really used for is to show a psychological state. And there are many artists out there, you know, Francis Bacon, Vincent van Gogh, who used portraits as a way to sort of show their emotional state when maybe they couldn't necessarily convey that through words. So there are a lot of sort of subtexts and subtle meanings in things like self-portraits that we'll talk a little bit about today as well. And we're also talking about these things in relation to still lifes and interiors and everything else we're sort of talking about, because as I've said a number of times before, all these areas and genres of photography overlap. We'll look at some different sort of things today when we look at some examples that I've shot. So I've just looking at my notes here, giving myself a bit of a refresher, but why do we do self-portraits? The easiest sort of answer to that is that it's cheap and it's convenient. So getting a model costs you money, means you have to organize time, organize a studio maybe. It's very easy to pick up a camera at home and take photos of yourself. And that's one of the main reasons that I've done it, and a lot of other artists have done it over the years, is that it's much cheaper and easier to make work about yourself than it is to make work about others. The other thing I would say is really good about self-portraits is that it really hones your skill as well. And one thing I've really learned about taking portraits of myself, particularly with sort of traditional lighting setups, is really how my light shapes my particular sort of face. And we'll talk a little bit today about how different face types shape light differently. And the other thing that I think self-portraits are good for as well is that they're just sort of a sense of meditation and self-reflection. You know, by taking photographs of yourself, it's sort of that personal experience. And I find that a really sort of calming, you know, beautiful thing. Like always, if you have any questions, you're welcome to pop them in the comments and I'll have a look as we're going. Hello to everyone that's said hello so far. Thanks for coming and joining me again today. But let's talk a little bit, I suppose, of giving us maybe some sort of guidelines to go off before we start taking our photos. So I've got my trusty whiteboard here again, and these are some things that I just sort of have jotted down as little questions I sort of ask myself while I take photos. Just fixing up my computer here so I can see your comments. So hopefully you can see this okay. And this isn't by any means an exhaustive list of questions, but hopefully this will give you a little bit of a starting point for taking your own self-portraits, particularly when we start to get into this competition that we're going to be launching in the next couple of days. So the first thing I think about is, what is the goal? And when I say that, what I'm sort of getting to in very general sense is, why am I taking this portrait? What am I trying to convey? What am I wanting to get across to the viewer? What particular aspect of myself am I wanting to show? And from that, you sort of get to the mood. I'm a big fan of sort of dramatic, contrasty portraits, but that's just my personal preference. You might have a different mood, maybe different psychological state will have a different sort of mood. So if you're going for light and airy, you'll have a different sort of lighting setup to if you're going for really dramatic. So you can use the sort of goal to influence the mood, and then you can use the mood to influence things like, what equipment do you need to use? So different sort of styles will require different sorts of equipment. The other thing too to think about is whether you want to make it figurative or non-figurative. And by that I mean, do you want to sort of convey yourself literally, so what you look like, or are you wanting to make it more abstract and more sort of difficult to decipher visually? You know, I would say that figurative portraits probably lend themselves more to a technical prowess sort of kind of self-portrait, you know, so how you can set up lighting really well, do poses really well, something like that. Whereas non-figurative is more for your psychological states. And the more abstract you get, the more, I guess, dire that psychological state becomes. It can often be a fine line with things like portraits to walk when it comes to abstraction, because you want to make it abstract enough in order to convey some sort of, you know, interesting effect or interesting emotion, but still figurative enough that we can tell it's a portrait. Otherwise, it just sort of becomes a blur of color. Not that there's anything wrong with that either. You know, there's no wrong photograph when it comes to making things creatively. Another thing to think about is what the materials say. So that's the artist in me. And there's one particular work I'll show you today where I have had thought long and hard about the materiality of the work, because depending on whether you do something using a scanner or using a reflective sort of material, you know, all these things give you a different sort of effect. And the materials guide the sort of the concept behind the work as well. Just excuse me for 1 second. I can hear the doorbell ringing. I'm just going to let my All right, excuse that little. She's crawled under the camera there to go and get the delivery. The wonders of working from home. Next on the list, what to reveal and what to hide. So this is in sense of both the frame of the photograph, but also the concept that you're trying to get across as well. There's nothing wrong with a bit of ambiguity and a bit of mystery behind an image, and often that can, I would say, with a bit of ambiguity, often it causes us to come back to a photograph. If you give everyone all the answers straight away, then that's sort of have one look at it and then they move on to the next thing. Where if you keep a little bit of an air of mystery to it, then people will keep coming back and back and back again, trying to decipher whatever sort of question you're trying to pose. As far as the equipment goes, I'll talk a bit about the equipment I've used today. So depending on the kind of shoot I'm doing, I'll be using different equipment. I've got a couple of sort of like bits and pieces I bought from Kmart, a couple of bits of photographic equipment, all useful for doing different sort of techniques. So we'll talk about that as we go, but keep these questions in mind and come up with your own questions too when you're photographing, because it's good that we're thinking critically about our work while we're making it. Don't just sort of absorb everything passively, but have an active participatory experience in the making of your photographs, and that's where you sort of will learn to make your own interesting tangents with things. All right, so let's jump into some photos that I've taken. I've got 4 different examples for us to go through, each looking at a slightly different way of making self-portraits, and we'll talk a little bit about the sort of technique behind all of those as we go. I'm going to swap to my computer now, and you should be able to see the display here. So this is our first example, which is a figurative example. So it's a photographs of me shot quite literally, so you can see my likeness using some technically nice lighting. I have one pose, which is angry bald guy pose. That's the one look I can sort of do. But what I've done is I've shot this pose in a few different ways. And the reason why I've done that is just to show you, if you watched the pet portrait session we did, I would have talked about how the sort of direction of the head changes the feel of an image. And I just wanted to show you here, the difference between head tilted up, head sort of neutral position, and head tilted downward. Even though the position of the body and the lighting hasn't really changed much between shots, very different feels to each of those photographs. Head tilted upwards gives a bit of a feeling, I would say, of defiance, a bit of a sort of Rage Against the Machine sort of feel to it. Neutral, it's sort of quite passive. I'd say it's probably the most boring one of them. And with the head tilted downwards, it really is a more depressive sort of feel to the stance. So when you are taking photographs like this of yourself, think about moving your body slightly in different ways. It could be tilting the head, it could be rotating the body slightly as well, and try a few different poses and then go back and have a look at the ones that you think feel best. And this is why it's good to think about what the mood of your photograph is before you start shooting, because depending on what sort of mood you're wanting to go for, you might prefer the one on the left or you might prefer the one on the right. It's really up to you. Now, these were shot just using an LED light source. So this light here, in fact, is ProMaster LED, which is quite a versatile light with a diffuser panel in it just to soften it slightly. But what it is a fairly hard light source. And for this sort of shot, I really like a hard light source. I actually took a photo here using a diffuser as well, just to show you the difference between the hard and the soft light. So let's go to the neutral pose and have a look at these. So this shot on the left was shot with a softer light source, basically holding a big diffuser up in front of the LED, and it's just such a bland shot compared to the hard light. What's happened is because the light's spread out more, it's illuminating the background more, so that's become a bit bright and distracting. It's also bouncing a bit of sort of fill off the background too, which is causing the shadows to be a little bit less intense, again making it a little bit boring. I've edited these photos so that the highlights on the cheek are the same size, same brightness in each shot. So the cheeks are actually the same brightness, even though it looks a lot brighter over here, because we're getting more sort of levels of contrast between the background, the cheek, and the shadow. But just so much more drama in this harder lit photograph. A lot of people try and avoid hard light, I find. because we're told soft light's more flattering, but hard light can really be used to great effect when it's used well. And one of the reasons why I like the hard light in these images is it really brings out the furrow in this brow here. You can see this sort of distinction in the eyebrow and the skin. You can also see some nice texture in the shirt as well, some nice sort of fall off on the arms here, and all that stuff's really just lost in the photograph on the left hand side. It's really doesn't do it for me at all, and I'm a pretty big fan of soft light, but it just doesn't work in this situation. Now, this was just made using one light source, so I've done up a little lighting diagram here to show you what was going on. So it was simply me standing against a blank wall in my house. I had my LED light over to the side here, pointed a little bit in front, about 45 degrees downwards or so. Actually, would have been less than 45 degrees downwards, because one of the things you realize when you photograph yourself is how light shapes your particular face shape. One thing I've noticed is that I have this very sort of deep set brow, and when I raise the lights too high, then I get shadows cast over my eyes. I still want to make sure that I've got a bit of light in the eye so that I'm getting this nice little catch light here. So I actually have to have the lights quite at a low angle in order to illuminate my face well. Now that might be different for you. It just really depends on the subject's face shape, but by photographing yourself, you can really learn about these. Now, this little diagram I did was using this website called Silights. This is a really great website to go to have a look at. I'm just going to pull it up quickly to show you. But you can make your own lighting diagrams, which is really useful. But the thing I really love about it is that what people do is they upload photos they've taken with lighting diagrams. So you can look at a photo and then you can see the diagram as to how it was shot. And I find it's a really, really useful learning tool. The interface of it is kind of not super user-friendly, but if you can trawl through all the images, there's some good things to sort of take away from there. So I recommend having a look at that website, Silights, Sylights, and doing your own lighting diagrams to particular things as you do them up. What else do we need to say about this? Probably not much, really. I think these are nice photographs. They're definitely moody. They're simple, but they're sort of elegant and simple. But it's a very sort of literal representation of the self-portrait. Maybe it's slightly psychological, and you could say all these were shot during isolation, so maybe they all have this sort of slightly depressive, sad undertone to them. But I'm not really one for literal sort of photography. I'm much more of a fan of abstraction. So let's have a look at some examples of abstraction which I've done. And we're going to go to this next one here, which is a reflective warp. So how did I do these photographs here? And I'll pull the three of them up. Well, these are actually done using just a bit of reflective material that I got from Kmart. So this here, which is this reflective, I think it was a tablecloth for about $2, but I'm always looking for reflective stuff whenever I'm sort of hunting around for things to photograph, particularly things that are reflective but also slightly malleable as well, because I know you'll get interesting sort of shapes and abstraction from something like this. Now, what I did to take these warped photographs was simply just hung a strip of that on the wall next to me. Pointed the camera into it, had a couple of different lights on. I had the LED light coming from the right-hand side and also just the room light coming from the left-hand side, which is why we're getting these slightly different colored highlights, and just sort of shot away. And as we talked about previously with abstraction, this sort of technique, you can really just do it 1,000 different times and get a different result every time you do it. Just by sort of slightly touching the reflective material, that changes the sort of warp that you're going to get. So it'll give you a slightly different sort of distortion. But I really love these photos. They're very Francis Bacon, and I'd say they're very psychological, and they're sort of their aesthetic, in that the human form sort of become this alien grotesque thing. You're getting multiple faces, you're getting these sort of symbiotic sort of creatures coming out here, things turned upside down, warped, split. It's a really evocative kind of photography, and I really love these sort of portraits doing self-portraiture because I feel like you can read so much into them. We're not just talking about like the beautiful aesthetics of it, but also what the artist maybe was feeling at the time of that work's creation. Just got another quick little diagram, but this one's again very simple for you. So I had this reflective material stuck to the wall. I was very close to it, maybe about 30 centimeters to 60 centimeters away. Had the camera coming in at an angle. I was looking in on an angle. When you're doing photographs with reflective works, you basically want to be able to see the camera in the reflection, not you, because if you can see the camera, then the camera can see you. I had an LED light to the side here, giving me a highlight on the right hand side, and I also had the room lights here, giving me a bit of a different colored highlight on the other side. I did try it with just the LED light and just the room light, but I thought it was more interesting and gave a bit more, I guess, sort of tonal and color variation by having these sort of different colored light sources to use. And yeah, I mean, I could have spent hours doing this, really just super interesting. And we'll have a look at a different way to warp a photograph as well. So this is an analog way to warp a photograph, but there's also digital ways that we can warp photographs as well. I'm going to pull up another thing here, and this was an old bit of code that I'd written that I fed a portrait through. And what this code does is called a random dithering algorithm. I showed one briefly with the interactive artwork I made the other day. What I'll do is I'll press play so you can actually see this in the works, and I'll minimize this other stuff so it's a little bit less distracting. But what this is basically a really rudimentary image compression algorithm where the code compares the pixel value to a random level of brightness. If the pixel sits over that level of brightness, then it goes to white. If it sits under that level of brightness, it goes to black. It's called random dithering. And what it does is creates this really beautiful static-like effect. So this is just a still image that's being compressed by this algorithm over and over and over again at I think 24 frames a second. But I really love how this sort of idea of, or this effect of randomization really brings a sense of life to the photograph. And I feel like these sort of images have a lot of energy to them. I feel like when I look at this portrait, it's staring back at me because it has this slight movement, even though really at its base form, it is a still photograph. And I guess the reason why I'm showing you this is one, because it's a very material look at something. So this really looks at digital materiality. It's talking about the code behind the image. It's talking about pixels, binary sort of data, binary ones and zeros, binary pixels, black and white. It also looks at the history of photography as well, so taking digital photography back to its sort of most basic roots, 50 sort of years ago. But I also just want to sort of say too that you don't necessarily need to just do still photographs. You could do time lapses, you could do little videos. Don't think that you only need to do stills when you're taking photos, because sometimes by having a little bit of a sense of time and movement within your image, it really creates a whole nother level of something. And I'll probably do something to do with like time lapse or movements when we're talking about still lifes again tomorrow. I haven't photographed anything for that yet, but it's amazing what a difference it can sort of make looking at something with a little bit of movement and then also looking at it still. And there's no right or wrong really, it just depends on what you're sort of going for. But I feel like a lot of photographers get stuck in this idea that everything needs to be a photograph, when really it could also be a video as well. At the end of the day, a video is just 30 photographs a second shown in quick succession. So, these two things are really intertwined. Let's go back and have a look at some more examples. So just to sort of show you, that was using a program called Processing. If anyone's wants to learn how to code during the shutdown, this is a very approachable and accessible coding format, and it was designed for visual artists. So you can get some really cool, interesting effects with it. Let's have a look at some more photos though. And there's one more photo I'm going to show you today, which is another kind of warp. This one is called a scan warp, and I'll show you how to do this in a second as well. But what I've done in these pictures is, rather than use a camera to take a photograph, I've used a scanner. And scanners are an interesting way of taking photos because they record an image line by line, rather than recording everything as a sort of a whole, an aggregate sort of thing at once. It just records things in slithers, and because it records things in slithers and it renders every moment precisely at that slither in time, we can use it to create these interesting sort of warp effects. Now, I'm going to show you the technique for doing this in a second, but just to give you a couple of sort of examples there, and there's also some close-ups that I did too. You know, when you get this close to a person, things start to get pretty intimate, but you can create some really interesting sort of colors and shapes and patterns with these things. And again, it's another thing you can just do a million times over and over again, and always get something interesting and get a new result. Now, one thing I will say is, one thing I really love about this technique is this beautiful sort of misregistration in the colors here. So we've got these, the sort of red, green and blue, cyan, magenta and yellow channels sort of all blurring into one. You do need a particular kind of scanner to get this effect. You need a relatively high-end scanner. Something that scans photos should give you that effect as well. If you've just got a cheap scanner from, Kmart or Big W or something like that, you can still get a warping, but you don't get that sort of kaleidoscopic rainbow effect, which is really, really nice. I'm not going to go into the reasons why to that, but really the differences in the sensor type, the cheap scanners use a CIS sensor, whereas the more expensive sort of negative photo scanners use a CCD sensor. So I have an Epson 550 here. This is an entry-level flatbed negative scanner. It does quite a good result too, but if you've got the money, you go up to something like a V850. I think that's the highest level model at the moment, and that has a couple of extra benefits to it as well, such as, I think it's dual lens, so sharper images, but they're pretty nice, inexpensive ways to scan negatives, as well as doing this more creative stuff too. So if you've got a bunch of negatives at home and you've been thinking about scanning them for ages, get yourself something like one of these scanners and start doing that while you're on the shutdown. It's a good way to kill a couple of weeks. So let's just go. I'm going to swap back to my screen here and just show you how these are made. It's really, really simple. I just have the basic sort of scanning program that came with my Windows computer opened up here. If you've got a Mac computer, then you'd have a scanning software for that too. But all you need to do is, while you're taking a scan, rather than keeping something still on the flatbed scanner, you move it while the sensor's sort of moving down. And you can control the movement by moving it different ways, moving at different times. You can control the speed of how quickly it scans through the DPI. So a low DPI will scan very quickly, high DPI will scan very slowly, and that'll also contribute to image size as well. So a high DPI will be a high resolution image. It'll also mean a bigger file. So, I use DPI, I suppose, both to control the aesthetics and the creative aspect of something like doing these scanography scans, and also to create a relatively high resolution file too. Let's set this to 300 DPI, which is sort of somewhere in the middle. I'm just going to hit preview so that we can see what's happening on screen. Now, if you were doing this to save an image, you'd want to actually hit scan, because doing a preview image doesn't actually save the photo. What I'm going to do is just hold my hand over the scanner. Just take it back here. So this is the scanner to the left-hand side. I'm just holding my hand still. So we've got a lot of baseline image for this one. And let's have a look at the preview. So nothing too flash there. You probably did that with the photocopier at some point in your childhood. Now let's have a look at what happens if I move my hand down with the scanning sensor while it scans. So I'm going to hit preview again. And as the scanner moves down, I'm going to move my hand too. And I'm picking a particular sort of place to do this in, to give me a certain effect. And the more you practice with this, the more you get a feel for things, the more you'll know when to move something in order to get a particular sort of warp. Let's have a look at that one. And we should see some stretched fingers. There you go. So you can really just go crazy with this. I would consider a photograph of your hand like this just as much as a self-portrait as a photograph of your face. Don't necessarily think that you need to have your face or even your body in it at all in order for it to be a self-portrait. A self-portrait's trying to represent you as a human being and how you feel and your place in the world. And there are many ways of sort of doing that. Justine Varga is a great artist to look at as someone who does self-portraitures in a very abstract, experimental way. So think about how you can get out thinking outside the box. Self-portraits don't necessarily mean that you've actually got to have yourself in the image. Now, No questions yet, but feel free to yell out if you do have any questions. We're going to be wrapping up pretty soon. Another couple of things I wanted to mention as far as self-portraits go. If you have Wi-Fi connectivity and you can connect your camera to your camera's app, this really helps with doing self-portraits, because most of the apps, what you can do is you can see a live feed of the camera through your phone. So when I'm taking these photos, I can actually stand in front of the camera, look at my phone, see what the photo is going to look like, what the lighting looks like, and that sort of thing, before I actually take the photo. And you can often take the photo with your phone as well. The other thing I have too is a little shutter release as well. These are relatively inexpensive, cost between sort of 30 to 60 bucks. And I always have one of these with me. One, because I don't like using my phone app too often, because it drains the battery on my phone and drains the battery on my camera quicker. So if I'm out hiking or something like that, I'd prefer to use a shutter release. The other reason why these are good to have around, and this happened to me yesterday, is that the camera apps just are really temperamental. Yesterday, when I tried to connect my camera to my camera app for the second time, it just didn't connect. It just like it stopped working. And no matter what I tried, it didn't work. Super frustrating. And no manufacturer seems to have really come up with a way of their camera app and their camera connectivity being foolproof. So that's why having this just as a sort of old-fashioned backup for 30, 60 bucks, goes a real long way, because it is very hard to go over, take a photo on self-timer, then run back and pose, and then go look at it and keep going back and forth. It takes forever, and it's not super conducive to being effective and productive, whereas just being able to sort of stand there, click this, pose, click this, pose, click this, pose in a few different ways makes the whole process a lot quicker and a lot easier. The model of the scanner, Tim, was a V550, an Epson V550. They do a couple of different sort of models in the range. This is the cheapest entry-level one, but they're all pretty good. You get slightly better scan quality going with a higher range one, particularly when you go up to the V800 series, because you get a dual lens scanning. It makes it a lot sharper if you're doing negatives. But for just doing sort of like basic stuff, if you're not going to print too big, then the 550 works really well too. Doesn't look like there's any more questions, so we might leave that there for today, but hopefully you've got a little bit of inspiration for doing your own self-portraits at home. Tomorrow we're going to talk about still lifes. So particularly I know we're going to talk about photographing glass, if anyone's wondered about that. Photographing glass is one of those tricky things, but there's a really easy, simple answer to it. So I'll show you how to do that. I don't actually know what I'm going to photograph, so I'm not going to give you too many more hints, but I know there will be glass, and it'll be a really interesting sort of talk, I think, because there's all sorts of symbolism hidden in still life, and we'll talk a bit about the history of still life and how you can use some of that symbolism in order to convey certain sort of conceptual messages throughout your photograph. Again, just to remind you, we are open at the moment, so feel free to pop into the store, though we encourage you to shop online. You can give us a call at 96722222, or you can chat to us online at any time as well. You're also welcome to send me an email at school@michaels.com.au. We are doing discounted online one-on-ones at the moment at $99 an hour, so jump onto that if you want to learn something specifically about your camera. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and I'll catch you tomorrow. See you then.